the 2013 European F3 Open. We're here on the legendary Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit, looming underneath the shadow of the Castle Nürburg and alongside the legendary Nordschleife. For this, the third of 8 stops on the 2013 season. We've already been to Paul Ricard and Portimao. We've got visits to Jerez, Silverstone, Spa, Monza and the Circuit de Catalunya to come. But for now, the attention of the 29 drivers lining up on the grid today is going to be on this, the 6th race of the season, and what has proved to be a very, very competitive season thus far. If you've never seen the European F3 Open before, to explain, there are 2 classes. There's the principal class, which is for the Dallara F312 chassis. There is the Copper class for the Dallara F308 chassis. All the cars run on Control compound Dunlop tyres. They also all have Control engines and gearboxes supplied by the GT Sport organisation, which means that the cars are all very evenly matched and the racing is always very close. To introduce myself, my name is Ben Evans. I'm here in the commentary box, just overlooking the start and finish straight at Nürburgring, which for the first time this weekend is bathed in sunlight, but it's still very, very chilly. It's just poking above 10 degrees in terms of the air temperature, but thanks to a very stiff breeze, it feels like it's an awful lot colder than that. Yesterday's race was won in dominant fashion by the UAE-based driver Ed Jones, scoring his 2nd win in a row and becoming the first driver to win more than one race in the 2013 season, because prior to that we'd also seen victories for Nelson Mason and Sandy Stuvik in Paul Ricard, then Santiago Urrutia and Ed Jones were winners at Portimao, and Jones continuing that winning feeling coming to the Nürburgring this weekend. However, for today's race, he's really got his work cut out to try and make it a double, because Jones uncharacteristically off the pace in qualifying and down in 7th position on a grid which is headed up by Hector Hurst, who finished 3rd in yesterday's race, and the British driver who raced here last year as part of the FIA Formula 2 Championship has been going very, very strongly all weekend in the Emilio de Villota Motorsport car, and he took the pole position margin by, in Formula 3 terms, a whopping 0.6 of a second in qualifying this morning, with then the Canadian driver Nelson Mason poised to share the front row of the grid with him, as the cars steadily working their way to the grid now. The race is going to be over 16 lap duration, although if we have a safety car then it will more than likely revert to time, but yesterday we got all 16 laps in within the allotted time span, as Formula 3 continues to be very much the finishing school of single-seaters. Absolutely capacity grid this year, as the category continues to teach young drivers everything they need to know about driving smoothly and rapidly in slicks and wings single-seaters, because the cars look like many Formula 1 cars, and crucially they actually have considerably more grip than they do relative power available to them, and that means that corner speed, corner exit speed in particular, is the key to a successful performance. And that's why drivers love racing Formula 3, because it teaches them so much about racecraft, about consistency and about controlled and smooth driving. So this is the grid then, with Hector Hurst and Nelson Mason showing the front row, from Sandy Stuvik and Santiago Urrutia on row 2, then Alexander Torrell and Andre Saravia, who's been going very well this weekend, row 3. Ed Jones down in 7th, just ahead of the first of the Copper class qualifiers, that's Richard Gondas back in 8th, then Yarin Stern and Tommaso Mencini locking out row 5 from Alexandra Cugno and Mario Marasca. Stern, who was an early retirement in yesterday's race when he was rather drop-kicked out of proceedings by Dennis Nagulin in the Campos racing car, who lines up in 13th, sharing the 7th row with Vicky Piria. We've got Cameron Twynham and Roberto La Rocca representing Team Westtech from Gerardo Nieto and Liam Venter. Top 20 completed by Sean Walkinshaw, who's been going better this weekend than he has thus far in 2013, and then Valeria Carballo somewhere off the pace in 21st. She was a retirement yesterday. Lorenzo Paggi is always spectacular. He lines up in 24th position, one of the 3 cars entered by Corvette Competizione. Matteo Vita, we understand, more than likely won't be there. He has withdrawn due to just enduring mechanical issues, and it's Nicholas Pola who completes the grid, because unfortunately family issues have prevented Luca Orlandi from competing today. So we have got, in fact, all 30 of them on the grid, because Vita, who looked like he wouldn't be racing, can see from the commentary position, is there. So this is Hector Hurst lining up in pole, and will Hector become the first winner of the season for the Emilio de Villota team? He gives the thumbs up. He's been in really very fine form this weekend. There's Hurst, he's unusually tall as well for a single-seater driver. but has adapted very nicely to Formula 3 machinery, having been in the slightly more powerful Formula 2 cars last year. Nelson Mason needs a consistent weekend. He got it off to a good start yesterday with 4th position. He, though, is on the hunt for his 2nd podium of the season, because having romped away with the 1st race of the season, he then had a start line collision with Santiago Urrutia in the 2nd race at Paul Ricard at Portimao. He rather optimistically tried to go 4 wide into one of the corners, and that ended his challenge there, so he scored no points in Portugal. A driver who has been racking up the points and paying tribute to the former RP Motorsport mechanic Pietro Stragliati, who very tragically was killed in a paddock accident here representing Maserati on Thursday, is Sandy Stuvik. Stuvik, who is looking for his 5th podium in a row, leads the championship. He's got 1 victory to his credit, but also 2 2nd places and a 3rd. 4th on the grid, another race winner thus far this year. That is Santiago Urrutia, again for RP Motorsport. The Uruguayan driver was in somewhat muted form yesterday, and he would very much like to bounce back with a podium. The crowd very much, as you can see, wrapped up for the somewhat unseasonal conditions here at the Nürburgring. It has been very, very cold and chilly all weekend, and getting heat into those Dunlop tyres is going to be absolutely critical on the formation lap. 5th on the grid is Alexander Toril, who's been one of the star turns of the season. He's already had 2 podiums, but has been very consistently racking up the points and is looming large in the championship standings, which admittedly are still in their early stages because we're only 5 races into the 16 race calendar, so still everything to race for as the championship unfolds. The grid is being cleared here, the teams heading back to their pit boxes, and then the cars will set off on the green flag formation lap and return for the standing start, and then 16 laps of racing. As we said earlier, they all run on a controlled compound Dunlop tyre, but given the air temperature today and given the antics we've seen into the first hairpin in some of the races that were held a little bit earlier on today from some of the German national championships, getting the heat into those tyres on this formation lap is going to be absolutely critical for the drivers, because we've seen lots of spinning in the early stages on the other races, and these drivers all very keen to make their mark in the European F3 Open, graduate on through the single-seater ladder, hopefully towards Formula 1. And therefore we do occasionally see a little bit of over-optimism into the first couple of corners on occasion. In the copper class, it's Richard Gonda who has been the quickest of the performers. It's actually been Daviano Favoranti for Corvetto Competizione who has been the driver who prevailed in the copper class yesterday, as Richard Gonda, his pace just begun to fail in the course of the race. So will be, rather it was Tommaso Mencini in the Corvetto car who prevailed in the copper class yesterday. So Tommaso Mencini, who was in very feisty form and really overcome to be on the top step of the copper rostrum, and he lines up in 10th today, just behind Richard Gonda on the 5th row of the grid. So Tommaso Mencini, Richard Gonda could give us a super scrap in the copper class, which is the Lara F308s. And if you talk to people in the paddock, they'd say the differential between the Lara F312 and the Lara F308 in terms of the lap time should be around about a second. You know that if a driver in the F308 is a second off the fastest time from the F312, then he's really at the limit of the car. And in qualifying this morning, well, both Richard Gonda and Tommaso Mencini were fractionally over a second adrift of Hector Hurst's somewhat remarkable pole position time. So the car's heading through the bottom hairpin, turn 7, before beginning the long climb uphill with the black car of Hector Hurst pacing the field round. His first pole position of the season. Alongside him, Nelson Mason, the Canadian driver, who has been under very strict instructions from the Westech team this weekend to bring the car home safely and get a couple of good results, because having had the fairly fruitless weekend at Portimao and the retirement in the 2nd race at Paul Ricard, was already beginning to lag behind in the standings. The big question, though, for today's race is how that man, number 11, Ed Jones, yesterday's winner, is going to be able to elevate himself on up through the field, because Jones was very, very comfortably in command of yesterday's race. He had a 5-second advantage for most of the race. He, in the last couple of laps, allowed Sandy Stuvik to close up onto his tail to get within 4 seconds, but even so, Ed Jones was emphatically in command. Did much the same thing as well in the race that he won at Portimao. Well, today he's got to do it the hard way. He's got to race his way up past the 6 cars ahead of him if he wants to claim victory. Hector Hurst, meanwhile, has just been getting better and better. He claimed second position in the first race of the year, a race though that was somewhat marred by inclement conditions, and he went then with the wrong tyre choice for the second of the races at Paul Ricard. But at Portimao, he really worked on his racecraft, took an excellent fourth place in the second race there by driving steadily, aggressive when he needed to be, but not overusing the tyres. And third place yesterday again was testimony to very consistent high-paced driving. There is Tommaso Mencini as he leads a couple of the BVM and Campos cars through the final chicane. They're coming towards the end of this green flag formation lap. It is then a 16 lap, or should the safety car intrude, 35-minute race that awaits us. And getting a clean start is going to be absolutely critical, because it gets very, very congested into the first hairpin here at the Nürburgring. And none of the drivers want to be involved in the entanglement when they arrive there. Catch a glimpse at the back of the field of Nicholas Pola, the German driver, who didn't actually set a lap time in qualifying this morning, nor did Igor Yurian in car 23, who lines up penultimately on the grid. Yurian, who prompted an early red flag when he deposited the car on the gravel trap at the final turn. The cars then coming into their grid positions, and we saw yesterday the front row had a very, very long wait before they were able to get underway, because the left-hand side of your screen, as you see it, is far from the racing line here at the Nürburgring, and therefore the drivers moving across to their grid positions as late as possible so they don't get any dirt and grit onto their tyres. They want to make the perfect getaway. Hector Hurst, meanwhile, to the right of your screen, is already angled across towards the inside of the road, because if he can get a good getaway, he wants to shut out Nelson Mason long before they reach the first corner, and therefore have a comfortable lead by the time that he arrives there. So the last couple of cars about to swing across and take their grid positions. Then when we've got Igor Yurian and Nicholas Pola in position, all 30 of them will be ready to go racing for the 6th time in the 2013 European F3 Open season. But we've got a waved yellow flag a little bit lower down the field. I think it's for Roberto La Rocca, but that's been retracted. So we get the green flag, and the race about to get underway here. The red lights go on and flash out. Who's got the jump from the line? Hector Hurst is well away. We've got stalled cars, though, further back. Have they all avoided them? Yes, I think it's Sean Walkinshaw possibly with the driver caught up. But for Hurst, he's made a perfect getaway. He boxes out Mason. Then we've got flying in formation Santi Stuvik, Santiago Urrutia and Alexander Torrell. They all slither a little bit wide because it's a deep braking zone, and those tyres are going to be very, very cold, but they're all cleanly through the first turn and can now set about getting underway with the racing in earnest. One of the BVM cars is struggling as well. It's either Vicky Piria or Mario Marasca. Look at who that was momentarily. It's looking to try and make progress there. Gerardo Nieto, but already Hector Hurst pulling clear of Nelson Mason. Then it's Sandy Stuvik, Santiago Urrutia, Roberto La Rocca trying to gain ground as well. It all gets a little bit tight. Yarin Stern, possibly the driver who's lost out there, the Israeli in number 3, being shuffled back into the clutches of Alexandra Kugno as they all sprint downhill. And Hector Hurst already a 1-second lead over Mason. It's just clear of Sandy Stuvik. Roberto La Rocca trying to gain ground. He's on the tail of Andrei Saravia, and Saravia making the best of starts, but he's had a good weekend this weekend as Guatemalan driver. A disappointing trip to Portimao. So Hector Hurst trying to do what Ed Jones did yesterday and just check out into the distance. Already Nelson Mason and Sandy Stuvik beginning to engage in battle. Santiago Urrutia has been a little bit muted thus far this weekend. He's in 4th, then in 5th we've got Alexander Torrell, and he has got Ed Jones looking to clamber up onto his tail as well. So Jones has gained 1 position off the line, but then he's had a poor run coming onto the fast swooping section towards the end of the lap. He's now under real pressure from Richard Gonda, having to cover the inside line, and Gonda looks to the outside, and he's going to try and go through here on Ed Jones. He takes evasive action across the inside of the chicane. Whether or not that will warrant further investigation remains to be seen, as Ed Jones immediately looks to fight back to the inside. Has he made that move stick? Have they deposited themselves in the gravel trap? He didn't make the move stick, and it's Richard Gonda who has overhauled Jones. So Hurst leads by a second from Nelson Mason. The further second back is Sandy Stuvik, the first of the many RP Motorsport runners, as Ed Jones climbs back into 6th position, demotes Richard Gonda, who's in 7th, comfortably leads the copper class from Andrei Saravia, Roberto La Rocca and Yarin Stern, who complete the top 10 as they swoop through turn 2 for the second time of asking into the sharp braking zone for turn 3, and Andrei Saravia right up onto the tail of Richard Gonda. Second of the copper class cars is Tommaso Mencini, but he slipped down into 13th and is under pressure from Gerardo Nieto. in the DAV racing car. And Ed Jones, a little bit of a muted start to the race for him because he's not really pulling clear of Richard Gonda, despite the fact that Gonda's under quite sustained pressure from Andre Saravia. So Hector Hurst and Nelson Mason, they are currently very evenly matched. Then we've got Sandy Stuvik, who is looking for his 5th podium in a row, edging out Santiago Urrutia. Urrutia, who is on the hunt for his 3rd podium in the season, as is car in 5th place, Alexander Torrell, who's just in behind him. So the race just beginning to settle itself down. There is Tommaso Mancini, yesterday's Copper Class winner, but he's got an awful lot of work to do if he wants to get up into that sort of position again today. It's the battle going on at the very bottom end of the top 10, and in fact the real concern possibly for Mancini is Vicky Piria, who is trying to get up onto his tail. That means it was Mario Marasca who was the car we saw ailing through turn 2 in the first lap of the race. Alexander Torrell once more looking to be maybe the fastest of the front runners. He's trying to get on terms with Santiago Urrutia. Andre Saravia still trying to gain some ground as well. Also got the change here for 3rd in the Copper Class, or do we? It's Cameron Twynham looking to the inside of Gerardo Nieto. Twynham in the blue car, Nieto in the black DAV racing car, and it's Cameron Twynham who's got the slipstream as they come onto the start and finish straight, and he should go through here. Cameron Twynham is being squeezed by Nieto as they head down into the braking zone for the opening hairpin, and there's an incident behind. It's Artur Janos who wipes out Nieto, and that's a huge incident for Artur Janos. The car flies off the road. Nieto, the completely innocent victim in that, and also caught up as well with Sean Walkinshaw, who Janos launched himself off. So it's the Campos driver, Artur Janos, who really was very lucky that that wasn't a more serious incident, because he made contact with Walkinshaw just at the start of the braking zone. It ripped the wheel off the car, and thereafter had absolutely no possibility to slow itself down. It's rather split open the pack as well. It means that Sean Walkinshaw is now under pressure from another of the Campos cars. That's Valeria Carballo. Have another look at this. And Walkinshaw just tagged wheel by Janos, who then came so close to having horrific impact with Gerardo Nieto. As it is, Nieto, completely innocent retiree from the race. And again, you see there the pace at which Janos arrived. That is a very, very lucky escape for all concerned. And well, Janos very effectively out of the race, as is Gerardo Nieto, who will look back at that and initially will think how unlucky he was, and I think on reflection may think how lucky he was just that it was his rear wing that was snagged and not a more substantial impact with the body of his car. Now hopefully that won't prompt a safety car. That is Gerardo Nieto, who hops over the barrier. So we've got one of the recovery vehicles about to join the track, and yes, the safety car has indeed come out as a result of that incident. So the safety car comes out. There was certainly lots of debris right at the edge of the circuit, and given the fact the cars had already spread themselves out around the track, no surprise the race director makes the call to send out the safety car, enabling the clean-up operation to be done properly and safely. So the safety car comes out at the end of lap 3. And there you can see Gerardo Nieto's car right at the edge of the circuit. It is Hector Hurst who leads from Nelson Mason 2nd. Sandy Stuvik is 3rd. Santiago Urrutia 4th. Alexander Torrell 5th. Ed Jones completes the top 6 in the Copper Class. Richard Gonda leads from Tommaso Mancini and Cameron Twynham. And this is an opportunity maybe for some of the drivers a little bit lower down the top 5 or 6 to get back on terms with Hector Hurst, because Hurst had done everything perfectly in the early stages, been able to build a very slight buffer over Nelson Mason. Here we see the crash again, ripping the front wheel off to Janos, and then the car very fortunately spinning rather than spearing in to Gerardo Nieto. Massive closing speed there from Artur Janos, who I imagine will be quite widely viewed on YouTube tonight, because that was a nasty incident. Well, unfortunately, neither driver had a particularly major impact in as Nieto stalks away. Glad to see him walking out of the car. There's the rear wing that got snagged off. And that was one of those incidents. All you can do, I think, is shrug your shoulders, cross your arms, because he would have had no idea what happened, and really won't until he talks to him on the radio or watches the race back a little bit later on. So it means the race is brought back under control. The drivers all weaving around to try and get some heat, or maintain the heat rather, in those Dunlop tyres. It also means we may well revert to the timed race, which is 35 minutes, as we, as you can see, have got 13 and 16 laps remaining. We've got just under 27 minutes left on the race clock. So Hector Hurst, frustrating for him because he was just beginning to extend his advantage over Nelson Mason. He'd set the fastest lap of the race on the lap in which the safety car came out. He'd built a buffer over Mason to 1.4 seconds. Mason, in turn, was the best part of 2 seconds clear of Sandy Stuvik, who was just beginning to be caught by his teammates Santiago Urrutia and Alexander Toril in 6th position, and still somewhat muted is Ed Jones. So this is the opportunity for Jones to look to fight back. They're coming towards the end of the lap now. No sign the safety car is going to be in on this occasion, so we should probably get one more lap behind the safety car here at the Nürburgring, and then hopefully the race will resume once more. What has thus far been a very enthralling first 3 rounds of the European F3 Open season for 2013. Seen lots of different winners, lots of fortunes ebbing and flowing between the principal teams in the championship, Westech, RP Motorsport and Emilio de Vallota, with the BVM cars of Mario Marasca and Vicky Piria getting very faster all the time, and not to discount the DriveX Copper class car for Richard Gonda. So through they come, all weaving around behind the safety car, which slows the cars down significantly as they arrive into the hairpin at turn 1, because that's where the recovery operation continues. Drivers have to just keep their wits about them as they weave around behind the safety car. There is Adrian Campos, principal of Campos Racing, who's charged the Polish driver Artur Janos involved in that incident. Janos graduating up to Formula 3 this year from karting, just misjudging the braking point of Sean Walkinshaw, and it's often the case when wheels just rub against each other like that, you can have an explosive impact, really, because had he, for example, made contact with maybe Walkinshaw's gearbox, it wouldn't have been anything like the severity of the incident it was. As it was, when wheels rubbed together, it ripped off the front suspension mounting, pitched the Campos car out of control, and eliminated the teammate to the car we're watching, Nicholas Pola, who qualified at the very back of the field and unfortunately is still some way towards the back of the field. So the order unchanged. Richard Gonda leads the Copper class, and this is good news for Gonda in the Copper class, because yesterday he was right at the sharp end of the field for the first half of the race or so, but then maybe he just overused his tyres, because Tommaso Mencini was able to really come back at him. Obviously for Gonda today, be able to preserve his tyres for just a little bit longer. For Hector Hurst, of frustration that his margin has disappeared, but maybe given the pace of the laps they're currently running behind the safety car, about 3¼ minutes, that this will help the race clock tick onwards, and when the race does get underway, he will have a lot less time to try and withstand the challenge of Nelson Mason. So circuit dressing is ongoing from the marshals, which would indicate that we probably will not have the safety car arriving into the pit lane at the end of this lap. So we may well have another lap behind the safety car before the race gets back underway. Tommaso Mencini, who was former Renault Italy driver, picks his way up in pursuit of Dennis Nagulin. They're currently in 12th and 13th positions respectively, as the marshals just treat the circuit with the circuit dressing. So we've got the additional laps credited, because for the first couple of laps behind the safety car you do get additional laps credited, so that's why the race duration has jumped from 16 to 18 laps. However, in reality, the race is going to almost certainly be dictated by time, because we have got exactly 23 minutes left on the race clock, and it's very unlikely they'll be able to do 14 laps within those 23 minutes. Certainly if the safety car stays out for another lap, which is to all indications what it looks like it will be doing. Indeed it does. So we're out to complete the 5th lap of the race, the second of what will hopefully be just 3 laps behind the safety car, coming to an end. It means that Hector Hurst continues to weave around down the start and finish straight, and there's lots of schools of thought about the best approach to weaving around behind the safety car, because most of the drivers will say that vigorous weaves are what they find useful, whereas a lot of the team managers and the tyre technicians will say, well, actually, you don't want to weave too vigorously. What you need to do is just make progressive movements and take the opportunity to accelerate through the corners when you can behind the safety car, because that will simulate the tyre warming as happens under race conditions. And actually, moving around like that can be somewhat detrimental. So through past the double wave jellos, the safety car board remains out. The recovery of the cars is certainly complete at the hairpin at turn 1. How much circuit dressing needs to be applied remains to be seen, but once that work is complete, and the marshals here at the Nürburgring, very experienced, always do a fantastic job, then we will be getting the race back underway. Yes, as soon as the train of cars has picked its way through, with Saud Al Faisal running towards the back of the field. Al Faisal, who's raced previously in the Copper class back in 2011, but he's also raced in Middle East very, very successfully, most notably in Radicals, having quite a tough season with the RP Motorsport team. It is Emilio Davoso Motorsport who see their man Hector Hurst to the fore of the field, and this would be the first win of the year if Hurst is able to maintain his position for the Emilio Davoso team. So they have got an awful lot riding on the success of Hector Hurst. For Nelson Mason, this would be his chance to claim the second win of the year. The same for Sandy Stuvik and Santiago Urrutia just behind him. If Alexander Toril can make the jump up from 5th, then that will be his first victory of the season. There is Ed Jones, driver who raced with very great success in the Intersteps Championship in the UK, where he made his debut in cars. That was a short-lived championship in the UK for the former Formula BMW chassis before graduating for the Formula Renault 2-litre Euro Cup last year. Was hugely successful in the F3 Open Winter Series. He, due to other commitments, wasn't at Paul Ricard for the opening rounds of the season, but thereafter has scored 2 victories and a 4th place. So the safety car is coming in on this lap, so the race about to get underway. There's 20 minutes or just under left on the race clock. I expect by the time the safety car arrives back at the pit entry, it's probably going to be something a little bit closer to 18 minutes of the race to go, which will give us 9 or 10 laps probably, something like that, what they will most likely complete. So who will be able to make the jump from the safety car? Because Hector Hurst has got to pick the perfect moment to accelerate away, and sometimes here at the Nürburgring it's a slightly easier safety car restart position than other tracks, because you all go very slowly through that chicane at the very end of the lap, and then that means that Hurst, if he judges it right, can then plant his right foot going into the final turn and do what he can to pull clear of Nelson Mason. But this, for Nelson Mason, he knows is probably next lap or so his best opportunity to overhaul Hector Hurst. Hurst weaving around, getting some heat into his tyres as they come into the chicane. It's now going to be a case of when does Hurst pull the pin to get the race back underway. The engine notes pick up and Hector Hurst accelerates into the final turn. He's already got the jump on Nelson Mason. Mason's got Sandy Stuvik with him, and then Santiago Urrutia, rather caught napping, has slipped some way back from his teammate Sandy Stuvik in fourth position under real pressure potentially from Alexander Toril, so shooting through, and Hurst able to build an immediate 0.8 of a second buffer as we've got a challenge very, very tight. Richard Gonda under real pressure from Roberto LaRocca as they arrive into the braking zone for turn 1. Gonda to the inside, LaRocca shoots off to the outside and very nearly spins the car. He slews back onto the road, and that frees up Richard Gonda to then take the challenge to Andre Saravia. Just said to him, this is the fight for 7th and 8th position. Richard Gonda doesn't want to fall into the trap that Kevin Giovese did last year en route to the Copper class title, which is throwing away points, racing with cars that aren't in your class, potentially get involved in other people's incidents. Ed Jones has had a very good restart as well. He's on the tail of Alexander Toril. There we have got Tommaso Mencini under pressure from the former GP3 racer Vicky Piria, as the leading trio, pretty much as they were, spaced by about a second or so. Then the fight for 4th, 5th and 6th is much, much tighter, with Ed Jones closing on Alexander Toril. It means that Toril is having to take the challenge to Santiago Urrutia as well. And Urrutia has not had the greatest weekend. He's just been a little bit muted. He was so spectacular at Portimao, and we were hoping for more of the same, but he's just not quite clicked with the Nürburgring circuit in the way that some of his rivals have. So although he's on course to score a couple of good points finishes, he's not really looked like he's going to be troubling the podium. Alexandre Cougnaud also coming under a little bit of pressure as well. Further down the field, he has got the WestTech cars just behind him. So there is Hurst, his advantage over Mason coming down. Then we've got Urrutia under real pressure from Alexander Toril. This is the battle that we saw yesterday, which eventually swung in favour of Toril. And Toril needs to get a move on here because he's got Ed Jones right on his tail. The fight for 4th, 5th and 6th then into the final turn. This to complete the 7th lap of the race. And who's going to have the slipstream advantage into turn 1? Well, Ed Jones could benefit from the double slipstream here. Alexander Toril, though, is right underneath the gearbox of his teammate Santiago Urrutia, and Urrutia knows that he covers the inside line nice and early. They all have a battle on the brakes. And does Urrutia outbrake himself? No, he doesn't. He does slide a metre or so offline. It gives Toril the good opportunity to try and challenge around the outside at turn 2. That will then lead to a slightly tighter apex on the exit to maybe challenge up the inside into turn 3. That's exactly what Toril does. Fortunately, Urrutia sees him in time. So remain as they were, with Jones in 6th position and being caught all the while by Andrés Saravia. It means the leading trio have pulled a long way clear, and it means if Jones or Toril can usurp Santiago Urrutia, they've got an awful lot of work to do in the remaining 60 minutes or so of this race to get back onto terms with Sandy Stuvik in 3rd position. So down the hill on towards the hairpin, and still in 4th position, Santiago Urrutia, the Uruguayan driver, plants his right foot, accelerates up the hill in pursuit of his teammate Sandy Stuvik. Stuvik, though, 2.5 seconds clear of Urrutia, and then Urrutia an awful lot less than that, clear of his teammate Alexander Toril. At the front of the field, Nelson Mason is beginning to come back to Hector Hurst as well. So we've got a couple of battles that are brewing up very, very nicely for the latter stages of this race. Ed Jones not quite able to get himself onto terms with Alexander Toril this time around. Maybe he's just taking counsel to see what unfolds in front of him. But Hector Hurst is beginning to come under real pressure from Nelson Mason. And Mason was 8/10 back at the start of the lap. He would appear to be a little bit less than that in deficit to Hector Hurst at the end of this one. And then we've got Toril and Urrutia side by side coming out of the chicane. And Toril's thinking about diving to the inside of Urrutia into the final turn. That smart drive from Alexander Toril. He's going to look to take advantage of the slipstream as further down the field, Valerio Carballo gains a place. Real battle is going to be the one into the turn 1 hairpin as Toril and Urrutia run side by side. Again, Urrutia staking the inside line nice and early. It's going to make Toril do this the hard way and try and drive around him. Toril looks for the switchback. Ed Jones sits there, poised, ready and waiting. And Toril knows he can't overcommit here because that is going to give Jones the opportunity to pounce and gain the position as Jones thinks about doing into turn 3. Head of the field, by the way, Nelson Mason's just set the fastest lap of the race and has closed to within half a second of Hector Hurst. So this is all closing up on itself. In particular, this fight for 4th is rapidly becoming the fight for 4th all the way down to 12th position because Santiago Urrutia evidently not got the pace of those rounds. This was Toril trying to get past Urrutia into the chicane. Nice driving from the pair of them, giving each other sufficient space. No opportunity for Toril to gain ground. So here is Dennis Nagulim in 12th. He's got Tommaso Mencini and Vicky Piria. Just behind him, it's Piria looking to the inside the bright yellow car of Tommaso Mencini. Mencini currently 2nd in the copper class. The car 3rd in the copper class is the blue car just at the back of that train. That is Cameron Twynham. Fight for 4th all the way to 11. Then we've got this slight gap from Roberto Lorica to Dennis Nagulim. Nice 4-way scrap going on behind him. And here is the battle for the lead of the race. It's still Hector Hurst who's keeping his nose in front of Nelson Mason. Mason, though, was just over half a second back from Hurst last time through. Maybe a bit less than that on this occasion. Riding the curbs then. The fight ongoing for 4th position. Yaron Stern part of that. In 9th, he's on the tail of Richard Gonda, and Gonda trying to overhaul Stern's Emilio Volta teammate, Andrés Saravia. Saravia, though, showing strongly as do we have a challenge for the lead here. Hector Hurst covers the inside line, and Nelson Mason has a good run on Hector Hurst, who needs to get the apex perfectly squared off here at turn 1. He doesn't quite do that, and Mason's all over his tail through turn 2, and this a very, very tight scrap again. Mason, fastest lap of the race set last time around into turn 3. Mason just has to keep it smooth, keep it consistent, try and force that mistake from Hector Hurst. Hurst has evidently got a fair degree of straight line speed, but then Mason's got the commitment through the corners. Sandy Stuvik a little bit lonely in third. In fourth, Santiago Urrutia, for the moment, has withstood the pressure from Alexander Torrell, and then Jones. And Jones maybe just on the cusp of being pressurised by Andre Saravia. It's the battle for the lead. The race separated on the line by a quarter of a second. It's gone out to half a second, but really the crucial thing for Nelson Mason is if he has the pace on Hector Hurst out of the final turn, it gives him the perfect opportunity to slipstream all the way towards the turn 1 hairpin, and that is really one of the prime overtaking opportunities. Another one, if you're feeling very, very bold, is the corner they turn through now, turn 10. And Mason, whereas yesterday he was just trying too hard and was a little bit ragged, today he is driving very precisely indeed. But Hurst has had a good exit from turn 11 through turn 12. He continues to pull clear of Mason. I suspect, yeah, the gap does go out by a couple of tenths of a second, but then Mason looking to get the car hooked up perfectly through that final chicane. Not sure whether he's been able to do that. Alexander Torrell, meanwhile, trying to come back to Santiago Urrutia. Battle for fourth position, no changes in position, but they're all still very, very closely bunched to each other as the leaders head through, complete the 10th lap of the race. 8 laps or 11 minutes remaining, and this time around Nelson Mason not close enough to challenge Hector Hurst into turn 1. Likewise, Torrell not really near enough to Santiago Urrutia. If there's a move going to come, it's potentially from Yarin Stern on the tail of Alexandre Cugno, rather, on the tail of Richard Gonda, and through he goes. Cugno gains the place, so Yarin Stern out of our sight demoted Gonda earlier in the lap, and now it's the turn of Alexandre Cugno to move up into 9th position. Richard Gonda slips to 10th. See it again. Perfect move really from Cugno, used the slipstream, got the car right to the inside of the road, a perfect point, and so through he went. Third position, Sandy Stuvik, again poised to continue extending his championship lead. Remarkable run of results this from Thai driver Sandy Stuvik. He was 14th for the Renault NEC Championship last year, and this would be his 5th podium in a row, but he's not finished any lower than 4th position any of the first 5 races of the year. Vicky Piria would appear to have raced her way through this group of cars. It's now Valeria Carballo who takes her opportunity to challenge Tommaso Mencini. Through she goes, gains the place. That promotes Carballo up to 14th position. Also, rather more worryingly for Mencini, leaves him in the clutches of Cameron Twynham and also Igor Urian, who is closing into his tail, and that the fight for second in the copper class. And you can see that Twynham is all over the yellow Coppa de Competizione car of Tommaso Mencini. Mencini, meanwhile, trying to get himself back up clear of Valerio Carballo, because he's very much like one of the F312 cars between himself and Cameron Twynham. But Twynham's got a good run here on Mencini as they accelerate through turn 12. It's the yellow and blue cars, 4th and 5th in the train. That's the one to watch. Mencini knows that Twynham's got the run. He covers the inside line, then moves across back onto the racing line, climbing ever onwards through the chicane as the battle between the two leaders is still very tight. We have got the team manager of Santiago Urrutia summoned to race control as well for something. I suspect that's probably when Urrutia was challenged by Torrell and he took the shortcut across the chicane a couple of laps ago. So Urrutia could find himself slapped with a drive-through penalty or a time penalty before this race is out. At the moment, we're seeing some very nice racecraft from both Hector Hurst and Nelson Mason, because they're engaging in a pretty frantic battle here to lead the race. But all the while, they're pulling well clear of Sandy Stuvik. Stuvik is several seconds back, 5 seconds back from the battle for the lead, as Igor Urian, Chaewon Lim, I think, getting maybe a little bit too aggressive lower down in the copper class. Immediately loses his place once more. So the Korean driver looking to pick his way up into the top 20. He's not there at the moment. Leading the race with, as you can see, now the race reverting to time. Just 8 minutes remaining is Hector Hurst. Nelson Mason, again, last time round, setting the fastest lap of the race, a 1 minute 54.9, which would have been good enough to give Mason second on the grid in qualifying earlier on. It's actually quicker than he went in qualifying earlier on. So Mason taking the pressure back to Hector Hurst. But what he's struggling with here is when he gets into the turbulent air behind Hector Hurst, he just can't quite close extra car length or so up onto the tail of Hurst that he really needs to be in a position to challenge for the lead. The slipstream afforded to him along the start and finish straight is really the best opportunity to do that. So he'll be hoping that Hurst has a little bit of an error. Alexandre Cougnaud trying to close up onto tail of Yarin Stern. Stern in turn is chasing his teammate Andre Saravia and could potentially demote Saravia here as they do battle over 7th and 8th place. Sprinting along the start and finish straight, and there is the orange helmet of Andre Saravia. Yarin Stern right on his tail, and Stern contemplates a launch to the inside. Saravia, though, able to just ghost across, takes away the full car's width to the inside of turn 1. There's no way through there for Yarin Stern, but this, thus far, has been a very, very strong season from Yarin Stern. We saw a part season from Stern last year. He really has had a step up in pace and performance with a couple of very solid results, and then compounded, unfortunately, by a couple of missteps where he's generally been involved in other people's incidents. So they fight over 7th and 8th position. We have got fractionally over 6 minutes of the race remaining, so I think we're probably going to get 3 more laps at the end of the one in which they're on. Down the hill, down through the gears, and around the bottom hairpin, Andre Saravia and Yarin Stern, the battle for 7th and 8th place. The Westech team watching on the pit wall now. Will they be able to get the double from this weekend? It will come down to just what Nelson Mason is able to do in the remaining 5 3/4 minutes of this race, because throughout he's been within a second of Hector Hurst, certainly since the safety car pulled in, but at the same time he's not ever had the opportunity to really challenge Hurst. You can see the gap between the pair of them seesawing in and out, but Mason breaking very deeply into the final chicane. He knows that a good run through the last couple of corners gives him the opportunity to take advantage of the slipstream down towards turn 1, and this is as close as Mason has been for a couple of laps now. It will all come down to the exit. He slides the rear of the car slightly. Again, just caught in the turbulent air. And flashing through, this completes the 13th lap of the race. And no, Nelson Mason is not going to be near enough to really challenge Hector Hurst as they arrive into the opening corner. Hurst also doesn't make any mistakes, driving very smoothly and consistently. Here's the battle, though, between Saravia and Yarin Stern. Also, Alexandre Cougnaud inviting himself to the party. It's Yarin Stern who moves clear of Andre Saravia very briefly. They're then 3 wide coming out of turn 1 into turn 2, and it's Stern who's got the inside line. He's going to push Saravia out wide here, but Saravia's carrying a little bit more momentum. Again, Stern's got the inside line for turn 3, and Saravia moves across his bows and then has got the inside line finally for turn 4. Holds on to 7th, and then Stern goes a bit sideways, and that gives Cougnaud the opportunity to challenge him, as well as Richard Gondra, as they plunge down the hill on towards turn 5. And Yarin Stern under massive pressure from Alexandre Cougnaud, having done everything he could to demote Andre Saravia. Saravia, though, playing the long game, knew exactly where he needed to be for the far section of the track coming out of turn 4. Did that perfectly, maintained 7th, and has actually built a very slender buffer up over Yarin Stern. Stern, though, immediately setting about closing back in on that. So here we see it again. Saravia gives Yarin Stern plenty of racing room through the left-hander at turn 4. Stern pitched sideways, and then that gave Cougnaud the opportunity to challenge. So still, the fight for 7th, probably the closest on the track at the moment. And Yarin Stern again straight back onto the tail of Andre Saravia. Saravia may have just been using his tyres a little bit too excessively in his defence from his Israeli teammate. Stern looks to the outside of Saravia as they arrive into the chicane. Nothing doing there, very much single file. Unless you're through by the time you arrive at the corner, you certainly won't be through midway through it. Instead, Yarin Stern thinks about challenging to the final turn. He's got the inside line. I hope Saravia's seen him. He has. Gives him racing room. And as they come out of the corner, they're side by side. This is going to do nothing good for the blood pressure of the Emilio de Villotto Motorsport team. They watch on impassively on the pit wall. It's Yarin Stern who's got the inside line. It's Saravia, maybe. He's got the straight line speed, and Saravia still fancies his chances, but Stern eventually holds the inside line. Saravia looks to the outside line, overcommits, possibly gives an opening to Alexandre Cougnaud. Cougnaud, though, is still boxed in 9th position. Richard Gonda leads the Copper class in 10th, but very much part of this fight. He'd like to see himself climbing up through the order a little bit more, and then Roberto LaRocca as well in 11th, still in close attendance, if not quite on the pace of some of the cars in front of him. So that Yaron Stern is through. He is pulling clear. And it's really a case of whether Andrei Saravia will fall into the clutches of Alexandra Kugno. As they're on, might make to be the penultimate lap of the race, because by the time Hector Hurst comes past the finish line next time through, there's going to be just under a lap time left on the race clock. So around the bottom hairpin, and then in the long climb up the hill, Yaron Stern in the fight for 7th position. Andrei Saravia with Kugno behind him. Ed Jones in 6th position, a little bit too far off in the distance. It's been a fairly quiet performance from Jones. So here are the leaders, Hector Hurst and Nelson Mason, and this is going to be Mason's last shot. Hector Hurst into the hairpin at turn 1, because we've got 1.5 minutes left on the clock. That is a lot less than a lap time here. So we're about to start the final lap of the 6th race, the 2013 International GT Open, rather European F3 Open. And are we going to get the 5th different winner as well? Let's see. Well, Hector Hurst under no particular pressure from Nelson Mason as they arrive on the brakes into the hairpin. He turns across, takes the racing line, and although Mason closed in on Hector Hurst to the tune of a quarter of a second, it still leaves him half a second in deficit. And Hector Hurst, well, this has been really very, very fine drive from the young British driver. Very smooth, very precise, a fine racecraft, because whilst he and Nelson Mason have done battle, they've now opened up 5.5 seconds advantage over Sandy Stuvik in 3rd position. Now for Nelson Mason, he's got to start thinking about the long game here, because while he did, he loved to challenge and try and force his way to claim victory. He also knows that 2nd place on a day when some of his championship rivals aren't doing too well will be very useful. Maxi Chuklin just snatching a break in pursuit. Sean Walkinshaw takes evasive action. He's climbing up out of the bottom hairpin for the final time. It's Hector Hurst leading the way from Nelson Mason. Mason is still, though, close enough to pounce if Hector Hurst was to make even the slightest error. Maximum concentration from the pair of them. Just 4 corners to go now as they jink out of turn 11, swooping downhill. Gap between the pair of them, closing a little bit under the slipstream, but not by nearly enough. So Hector Hurst has just got the chicane and then the final turn to go between himself and his first victory in the European F3 Open. Mason has closed in once more onto the tail of Hurst, but it's not going to be good enough. So into the final turn, Hector Hurst, he's got 2 car lengths advantage over Nelson Mason, and that should be sufficient, provided he gets the car squared up on the exit, which he does to perfection. He accelerates to the line, the checkered flag goes out, and it's the first win in the European F3 Open for Hector Hurst, the first win of the year for Emilio de Villota Motorsport. Nelson Mason follows him through in 2nd. 3rd place has gone to Sandy Stuvik. 4th, Santiago Urrutia. 5th, Alexander Toro. 6th, Ed Jones. And then in the fight for 7th, it is Yaron Stern who wins it from Andrei Saravia and Alexandra Kugno, with Richard Gonda claiming victory and 10th overall in the victory in the Copper class. 10th overall, Roberto LaRocca 11th and Vicky Piria in 12th. The remainder of the Copper class podium completed by Tommaso Mencini and Cameron Twydom, 15th and 16th position respectively. The end of what was a race full of frantic dicing throughout the midfield and a very, very tense battle for the lead. And that really was an excellent drive from Hector Hurst, and the sort of drive in Formula 3 really gets you noticed, because it's one thing to do what Ed Jones did yesterday and drive into the distance, but today Hector Hurst has had an ever-present shadow in the form of Nelson Mason all over his tail, and has driven superbly well not to get flustered, not to make a single mistake. It means that Nelson Mason has not had the opportunity to even put together a sustained challenge to wrestle the victory away from him. So here are the final results, with the win for Hector Hurst, 2nd place and fastest lap for Nelson Mason, and the podium completed with another podium for Sandy Stuvik, 4th for Santiago Urrutia, 5th Alexander Toro and Ed Jones, but disappointed I think with 6th. Richard Gonda then wins the Copper class in 10th, having been part of that excellent fight for 7th, which was eventually claimed by Yaron Stern from Andrei Saravia and Alexandra Kugno. Roberto LaRocca just outside the top 10, and it was Vicky Piria who raced her way through the fight for 12th position, ahead of Valerio Carballo and Dennis Nagulin. Tommaso Mencini back onto the Copper class rostrum, this time in 2nd position, with Cameron Twynham completing the Copper Class podium for the second time this weekend in excellent 16th position, withstanding the pressure from Igor Yurian. Matej Vita racing very well up into 18th position. Likewise, Alexei Chukhin has had a weekend to forget all sorts of problems. He completes the top 20. In terms of the Drivers' Championship, it's still Sandy Suvik who leads the way, but now Hector Hurst has climbed up into second position by dint of an excellent weekend here at the Nürburgring. Ed Jones slips to third by just 1 point, with Santiago Urrutia and Alexander Toro in fourth and fifth, also separated by just a solitary point. Nelson Mason has brought himself very much back into contention with 2 strong points finishes and his second rostrum of the season. Nelson Mason clambers out of the cockpit of his Team Westtech car. I think he'll be reasonably happy with that performance. Handshakes from the team. Certainly in terms of the pace, he may have just had the race car underneath him to overhaul Hector Hurst, but it was not quite enough. So Hurst, who has been thoroughly savouring the slowing down lap, still yet to arrive in Parc Fermé. Thumbs up from Sandy Stuvik, and rightly so. That is his 5th podium in a row, and he is just continuing to pile on the points. So here is the race winner, Hector Hurst. You can hear the applause in the background from his Emilio Villotto Motorsport team as he comes to a halt, hops out of the cockpit, double thumbs up. He will be overjoyed with that, and quite rightly so, because last season when he was in the FAA Formula 2 Championship, he showed flashes of pace, but he only finished 10th in the championship. And the year before that, racing in Formula Renault in the UK, he finished 13th in the championship. Hector Hurst been thought of for quite some time as a driver who's really got the talent, and when it comes together, it's going to go fantastically well. And this season, thus far, in the opening 3 rounds, that is how it's proved to be. He has steadily worked his way up through the field and has had a fantastically consistent weekend here at the Nürburgring, and 2 podiums, a very just result for him. Likewise, Richard Gonda continuing in the DriveX car to increase his stranglehold on the Copper Class. And I think most impressively for Gonda as well, racing well up inside the top 10 of the race overall. So the drivers, having completed their weekend's work here at the Nürburgring, very shortly heading up to the rostrum, and then from the Nürburgring in a fortnight's time we will be at Jerez. 3 weeks on from there, it's the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit. Then we have about a 6-7 week summer break, and that will then take us to Spa in the first weekend of September, on to Monza in October, and then the season concludes at the circuit to Catalunya in November. So let's take a look back then at a entertaining and dramatic race from the European F3 Open. Off the line, it was Hector Hurst who was able to withstand the challenge from Nelson Mason, although Mason was in close attendance the way it was going to be for much of the race. Richard Gonda, likewise, was in the thick of the action, leading the Copper Class. The safety car came out after this very nasty accident between Artur Janos and Gerardo Nieto. Janos fired off the road at high speed, tagging Nieto and eliminating him from proceedings as well. It brought out the safety car for a lengthy period whilst the circuit was cleared. When we got underway, Richard Gonda still found himself in the thick of the action and still found himself doing battle with Roberto LaRocca in a battle that emerged as a fantastic fight for 7th position. LaRocca, though, losing a little bit of ground with that lurid moment. At the front of the field, Hector Hurst coming under increasing pressure from Nelson Mason. Mason unable to even get himself into a position where he could challenge for the lead. Valeria Carballo raced her way very impressively up through the field, as did Alexandra Cugno, who made that move on Richard Gonda for 9th position in the late stages of the race. Super scrap as well in the Copper Class between Tommaso Mencini and Cameron Twynham, as Mencini was able to hold off Twynham, as the Villotto Motorsport drivers Andre Saravia and Yarin Stern fought over 7th. Eventually, this move swung it in favour of the Israeli driver Yarin Stern. Saravia then fighting hard against Alexandra Cugno to maintain his 8th position. And throughout the 35 minutes of the race, Hector Hurst was trailed by Nelson Mason, but it was Hurst who came through to claim his first victory in the European F3 Open and become our 5th winner in 6 races. So another chance to recap the Drivers' Championship, and this weekend from Hector Hurst has been enough to elevate him up to second in the standings, albeit some 32 points back from Sandy Stuvik, who's thus far this year been incredibly consistent. So onto the rostrum then. In third position, Sandy Stuvik. Second place, Nelson Mason. And our race winner, Hector Hurst, with Emilio de Vallota Motorsport being the victorious team this weekend here at the second race of the third round of the European F3 Open. Applause on the podium as they prepare for the national anthem of the winning driver. National anthems complete. Time for the presentation of the trophies, and Sandy Stuvik is beginning to acquire a very large collection of them. Another third place to build on the third place that he had in Portimao as well. Second place for Nelson Mason, his second rostrum of the season, and then Hector Hurst, his first win and third time on the podium in the 2013 European F3 Open Championship, with Emilio de Vallota Motorsport being the winning team. So they congregate on the top step of the podium for the photos. Smiles all around, and Hector Hurst wasting absolutely no time at all in reaching for the bubbly. Nelson Mason doing the same, dousing Sandy Stuvik and Hector Hurst. Hurst still working on the bubbly. He'll save that for another day. And what you can't disguise there is the delight for Hector Hurst. He scored an excellent first win. Sandy Stuvik drove very hard, very consistently, and took, in the end, what was a little bit of a lonely third position. Nelson Mason tried very, very hard to overhaul Hector Hurst, but it wasn't going to be quite enough for Mason today. He will regroup and come back to Jerez feeling much more confident, with then Hurst taking the victory in the copper class. Then it's Cameron Twynham in third, Tommaso Mencini in second, and Richard Gonda taking the win in the DriveX car, with DriveX, of course, being the winning team in the copper class. National anthems finished. It's time to present the trophies. So Cameron Twynham for third position, second place Mencini, and then Richard Gonda, another victory in the copper class in what's proving to be an excellent season for him. The DriveX school team receiving the team's trophy as well. So that just about brings us to the end of our coverage of the third round of the European F3 Open here at the Nürburgring. Very much hope that you've enjoyed the action. We're at Jerez in 2 weeks' time. Until then, for myself, Ben Evans, it's goodbye.